The warm glow from Anansi's custom meters casts long shadows, making the dust motes dance in the humid air. Patched cables snake across the floor, a nervous electrical pulse humming beneath the static. Lex taps a rhythm on a stack of Xerox zines, waiting for the signal to stabilize.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Toronto checks in at 56 degrees and mist. Wind check, west-southwest at 3 miles an hour. Tonight, we chart the true cost of convenience, asking where our internal compass points when the external world demands a compromise. We kick off with a dispatch from the diplomatic front. Reports suggest the UK government made a hard choice in 2024, trading human lives for economic ties.
On the diplomatic front, concrete facts reveal that the UK Foreign Office, specifically in May 2024, received confirmed intelligence regarding Ethiopian backing for the Rapid Support Forces, a genocidal militia operating in Sudan. This critical information, which could have triggered international intervention to avert mass atrocities, was reportedly suppressed. The internal justification given points to protecting existing diplomatic ties and investment flows with the UAE, which has significant economic leverage and influence in the region. Who is affected here? Primarily, the millions of Sudanese civilians caught in the crossfire, suffering displacement, violence, and the specter of genocide, all while their pleas for international protection went unheard. But also, the moral integrity and long-term standing of the UK's foreign policy apparatus, which risks being perceived as prioritizing profit over foundational human rights.
Exactly, Lex. The immediate cost is the moral erosion within statecraft, where economic leverage overrides the duty to protect vulnerable populations. One viable alternative path would have been immediate public condemnation of Ethiopia and targeted, multilateral sanctions against all parties enabling atrocities, before any suppression. This would have signaled an unwavering commitment to international law and human dignity. For a next move, we must demand a public, independent review of the Foreign Office's 2024 intelligence protocols, perhaps through a Radio Chronicle challenge submission. This would clarify the decision chain, enforce accountability for intelligence suppression, and crucially, establish new mechanisms to insulate humanitarian action from transactional diplomacy. We need to build a civic architecture where human dignity is a non-negotiable structural beam.
Anansi hits it. This isn't just about a single diplomatic misstep. It's a structural failure in the civic architecture. When a state's self-worth becomes contingent on external validation through investment, rather than its adherence to universal principles, the internal compass is dangerously skewed. We discern here the toxic residue of short-term economic gain overshadowing the architectural signal of ethical governance. Building a resilient inner and civic architecture means asserting unwavering autonomy, where the protection of human life is a primary, non-negotiable directive, not a bargaining chip.
The neon tube flickers, the color of a wound that won't close, and the room holds its breath for a second. We have already run that tape. Here is the closed-loop takeaway.
The irony isn't lost. The infrastructure designed for our digital convenience is making physical spaces deeply inconvenient, even dangerous. For one viable alternative, we need to rethink the spatial and energy footprint of data centers. Imagine distributed, smaller data centers integrated into renewable energy grids, perhaps even utilizing excess heat for district heating schemes in colder climates, rather than concentrating them in massive heat-spewing monocultures. This would require architectural planning that prioritizes local well-being. A concrete next move for the affected community would be to demand independent environmental impact assessments and thermal mapping studies, funded by the data center operators themselves, with binding commitments to offset local heat increases and contribute to community cooling initiatives, perhaps through green spaces or passive cooling infrastructure.
This slow situation perfectly illustrates what happens when logic, driven by market efficiency, completely divorces itself from emotion, the lived experience of the community. It's a civic architecture built without consent, ignoring the dignity of its inhabitants. The architectural signal here should be about sustainable integration and mutual benefit, not just maximizing processing power. We must practice sharp discernment to separate the architectural signal of progress from the toxic residue of thoughtless expansion. Building resilient inner and civic architectures means designing with the human element at the core, understanding that our digital lives cannot thrive at the expense of our physical comfort and well-being.
Moving to the South China Sea, the concrete facts are that China has recently reiterated and in some cases expanded its sweeping maritime claims, asserting sovereignty over vast areas well beyond its internationally recognized exclusive economic zone. These claims, often underpinned by historical narratives and the controversial 9-line, lack legal basis under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, which China is a signatory to. This includes the construction of artificial islands and the militarization of disputed features. Who is affected? Beyond the obvious impact on littoral states like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, whose sovereign rights and access to vital fishing grounds and energy resources are directly threatened, the entire international community is affected. This challenge undermines the principle of freedom of navigation, established international law, and the stable global order that facilitates international trade and security.
Precisely, Lex. This isn't merely a territorial dispute. It's a test of the civic architecture of international law and provenance. One viable alternative to Beijing's unilateral assertion would be for China to pursue resolution through international arbitration, similar to the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling that largely rejected China's claims, and to engage in multilateral negotiations grounded in UNCLOS principles. This respects the established framework for maritime governance. For a next move, the U.S. and the international community must immediately and unequivocally reject these latest claims through coordinated diplomatic statements, joint naval patrols asserting freedom of navigation, and clear economic and diplomatic consequences for continued breaches of international law. Silence, in this context, is not neutrality. It's tacit acceptance, eroding the very foundations of a consent-based global order.
This maritime power grab illustrates the fundamental tension between perceived national self-interest and the structural integrity of international civic architecture. When a nation operates solely on a logic of expansion, ignoring the established provenance of international law and the consent of other nations, it creates confusion. We must use clear analysis to turn this confusion into actionable vectors, reasserting the dignity of international agreements and the framework of shared norms. The integrity of our global systems, much like our personal ethics, demands that we assert unwavering autonomy from revisionist narratives and uphold principles even when it's inconvenient.
Powerful words on the need for clarity and conviction in a complex world. We've got a caller on the line. You're on the signal. Patching in a caller, the skeptic. You're on the signal.
Thanks for taking the call.
Are we keeping people at the center of all this change?
Copy that, bringing it back to the main thread.
The weave depends on us remembering the human thread.
And it means setting guardrails so progress serves people first.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.